This is Gary Barnett, and you are listening to the Fulham Focus podcast. Enjoy.
Hello, yes, there may be no Fulham game this week because of the first international break of the season, but there's still plenty to discuss when it comes to Fulham Football Club. So I've rounded up lifelong Fulham fan and football finances expert Tristan Poturicic and your friend of mine, Danny Smith, to look back at our business in the transfer window, given that it closed on Tuesday evening. Plus, in light of some criticism aimed at Fulham from fans of other clubs in the Championship about the financial resources available to us from the Premier League parachute payments, whilst we got Tristan with us, we thought we'd set the record straight about a few things. Make yourself a cup of tea, sit back and put your feet up. My name is Matt Boisclair, and this is your Fulham Focus podcast.
Fulham.
Right, lads, let's have a look at the transfer dealings then. So the transfer deadline passed for another summer. In addition to Harry Wilson, Paulo Gazzaniga and Rodrigo Muniz, the two Watford lads, Nathaniel Chabala, is that how you say his name? Chabala,
yeah.
Chabala. The two Watford lads, Nathaniel Chabala and Domingos Quina, joined on Tuesday night. Just got a couple of facts about the pair of them. So Domingos Quina played 14 times for Watford last season, scoring once before joining Spanish side Granada on loan, where he played 8 times and scored twice from January onwards. He's on loan with us with an option. He's an attacking midfielder. He's not worked with Marco Silva before, and he's Portuguese. Whereas Chabala, he's a 26-year-old midfielder who played 38 times and scored 3 goals for Watford last season. Obviously, they went up last season as well. What I did notice was that he was booked 12 times, though. So may have a discipline issue there, or we may not. We shall see. I watched the interview he did with the club when he joined, and he talked about the leadership he's going to bring to the dressing room, how he already knows a lot of Fulham players, and he started off in the Fulham Academy. The pair of those guys are mates from Watford, good mates. You can see there's some chemistry between them. Tristan, do you know much about either of these two? What do you make of the signings?
No, to be fair, I mean, especially Quina, I've not really heard a lot about him at all. Obviously, it was his breakthrough season last year. Spent half of it in Spain, so he wasn't really visible to English clubs. I think with Anguissa going, Chabala makes a lot of sense. I think that one is the one that you'd probably look at and say he's a signing for this season. I think Quina's probably a similar one to Muniz, really, in that we've got other options in where he plays. He looks like, looking at his bio and stuff like that, he looks like a more attacking midfielder, whereas Chalaba's that obviously sits and he's defensive. And I think he's there for cover, and with the opportunity to kind of look at him as a future signing, as I say, in the same way as Muniz. I wouldn't expect him necessarily to play loads. The interesting thing though is, and we'll probably come on to it another point, but for me, I mean, you don't want to break up the 3 that's in there at the moment. Matt, I've seen you at the away games. You've been to the away games as well, and I've been. I just think midfield we've looked really good. I think Seri's looked great. You can't drop Carvalho, and I think Onama's playing probably the best he's played as well. So I think it'd be, but then I can't see a player like Chalobah coming in and wanting to sit on the bench. So I think there's interesting selection problems there. You've then got Reed coming back as well, of course. So I do wonder. Sometimes you see it, and we saw it with Seri and Le Marchand. I do wonder if there's an element of Watford settling for a certain deal if we took the second player on loan to give him, a bit more chance of first team football than he would have got in the Premier League. And I wonder if there's something like that happened for us to get Chalobah for what was, essentially for what we're seeing as the reported fee or what people's estimates of it is quite a low fee for a player of that age and experience. So I wonder if there's something like that in the background with it. We'll never know, but it would make sense. And we, as I say, we've seen it before.
Danny, I want to bring you in here, and I want to pick up on that point you just made about Harrison Reed, actually, because last season we were talking about him being one of the first names on the team sheet. But now I just don't see how he's going to get in the team. I know he can play right back. I don't really want to see Harrison Reed at right back, though, because I like the right back to be a more attacking player, which I don't think Harrison Reed is. Josh Onomah, he does like sitting, but he can also get forward. And Seri's just got that incredible passing range, which probably Harrison Reed hasn't got. So it's difficult to see how Harrison Reed gets back in. Danny, what do you think? Does Harrison Reed get back in? And also, what do you make of these two new lads as well?
Yeah, it's good competition for places. And when everyone's fully fit, I honestly, I don't know what the best combination is going to be, because the three we've got at the moment seem to complement each other really, really well. All I'll say is that with Anguissa going, I think it would have been incredibly naive for us not to bring in Chalobah at least, because although it seems hunky-dory at the moment, it's a long season, and I don't think you can depend on Reed to be fit for a whole season. I think his track record with us has shown that he does pick up quite a few injuries. And Josh Onomah and Seri haven't played that much football over the last couple of seasons. So, and then, of course, the other two were Carvalho and Francois, who are only young. So it's good to have a player in there that's got a really good pedigree at championship level. For a long time, he was the sought-after loan for championship clubs. And last season at Watford, he was, he played, 38 games in a team that got promoted. So, yeah, I'm gone. Sorry.
No, I was just going to ask Dan. I mean, but based on that, and you've mentioned Francois, are we basically writing Kearney off for this season then, and saying we don't expect to see him because, of course, he's the other one that plays? Oh, he's more refined in that he has to play the advanced one of those midfield three, but he's still one of those midfield three, and he's the only one we haven't mentioned. Do you think he's written off for the season?
It's a difficult one because he hasn't played since, I think it was Newcastle away when Anderson was sent off last December, which is a long time to be without your club captain. So I think it's not, I didn't leave him out on purpose. It's just one of those where I think if he's fit, a bit like Congolo, then great, it's an added bonus. But you can never plan around them now. It doesn't look good for Kenny, does it? The longer he's out, the more doubt there is over whether he's ever going to get over these injury problems. So it feels like the natural time to move on and rebuild that midfield and start again. So I'm happy for Kenny to come back in and push for his place. But to be honest with you, we're very fortunate. I mean, this squad, not talking about the starting 11, but the squad has got to be the strongest in-depth squad this level's ever seen, isn't it? I mean, even Tigana wasn't blessed with the options we have now. If you strip back that midfield past John Collins, Lee Clark and Sean Davis, who was next in the midfield? Was it Nicholas Sanoon, who never played?
I kind of disagree that we're going to end up having an argument there. I kind of disagree there because I think Sanoon, I always thought looked a good player when we saw. He just didn't play very much because actually that midfield three was pretty much ever present, right? And I think you're right. I think there was definitely. I don't think we had a lot of depth on the wings there, but then equally, what they had up top in that Tigana season was completely different level to what we've got now. We've got one player who, might not have even made, the top two of that three players we had, and no one else. And I think defensively, there was the cover there. I mean, you think, you obviously went with the first choice two centre backs of Melville and Coleman, but you also had Simons, who came in for Coleman when he was injured. You had some cover there. And Alan Nielsen, we were talking about him the other day and how well he did in that classic game at Ewood Park and came on completely seamlessly after Brevitt had been sent off. So I think there was more to that squad. I just think it was a very well-oiled machine that didn't really need the cover because actually we didn't have a lot, apart from Coleman, we didn't have a lot of really long-term injuries to it. So I'd argue, I'd say definitely, with the possible exception of that, it's the strongest one we've seen. And actually, I think, for me, it's by far, I said it's arguably on a Facebook comment earlier, but I was being a bit political there. I'd say it's by far the best transfer window we've had under the Khans because we've brought in 50% of our signings or 60%, 3 out of 5 relatively early. B, it's not stacked up with loads and loads of loans, which you know my views on that. And C, we've exited it, with a very, very strong squad with actually not many or no apparent clear holes in the squad, which we always seem to have had.
What we were expecting to happen yesterday, but I want to come on to the players that left in the summer as well. But who we were expecting to leave was Cyrus Christie, because Marco Silva said he's surplus to requirements. He hasn't gone, but we're now left with a quandary over who does play right back. I mentioned Harrison Reed earlier. Does Cyrus Christie come back in whilst Kenny Tetty's injured? Or does Dennis Adoy stay there? And I think Dennis Adoy is always a dependable option, if not spectacular. I think he's usually a 7 out of 10. But I think I've said this a few times on previous podcasts with some of the other lads. Cyrus Christie is a really good championship right back, especially in a team that likes to attack. And if he's with us, I'd certainly play him.
Can I step in there? Just because that coincides what you said about the Tigana argument. I think the way squads are used now is completely different to as it was then, because obviously back then you only had 5 subs. Now, what is it now? 9. So I think there's more emphasis on the squad game than there was back in those days. More rotation, but Cyrus Christie is a good example of that. Tigana for me had an incredible 15 or 16 players. This squad at the moment has about 26, and I think most of them would walk into any other championship side. It's almost like we've become the Man City of the championship, whereas apart from 1 or 2 teams, the only side that probably could compete with our first 11 is our reserve 11. If you was to put our backup 11 on paper, Rodak, Brian, Hector, Mawson, Adoy, the argument for the midfield, because there's so many of them, I don't see how anyone is going to be able to compete with that over the entire season. And what worries me a little bit is, have we got too many options? Is there too many players to try and keep happy now?
I think that's the point. I spoke to another friend earlier today, and I did say the one thing that concerns me is, are we cutting off paths because he's going to have to play these players in games where other players need a rest or in the cup games and stuff like that. And as a result, are we then cutting off the path to first team football for some of the youngsters? And we all know we've got a talented. I think personal view is you're over egging it a little bit with the quality of the squad. I think if you put that the second 11 on paper and said to most Fulham fans, would you be happy with that being your first 11? I don't think many would expect us to be finishing in the playoffs with the likes of the players you've mentioned there being first choice, and certainly as you get further up the park, I think that becomes more and more pronounced. But I do agree that we've got a lot of cover in the squad and we've got competition for places in the right, and it is good. I agree totally that we've got the best squad.
If you did look at that backup 11, it's arguably the team that Parker went up with.
I was going to say, how many players in our squad have been promoted from the Championship before?
Oh,
loads. But a lot of them with us multiple times, but other players as well that have been promoted previously. It's insane, the experience that's in this squad.
Not only that, you're absolutely right, Matt. Not only that, though, if you actually look at the number of them that have been in representational divisional teams of the year, that have won divisional player of the season. I mean, I think that when I looked at it when in the Parker promotion season, I think you had 4 or 5 divisional player of the seasons in there, because Knockhart won it a couple of times. I mean, maybe not 4 or 5 different individuals, but on 4 or 5 occasions, a player that was now playing for Fulham had won it. So I think they're not only promotion winning, but very highly rated as well. It is very good. But but then equally, I do think if you're playing Hector all the way through the season, or you're playing some of the players, then it's not quite so strong. So I think it's a bit up and down in terms of the being able to interchange if a player's suspended or injured. As I say, I think obviously up front is where the biggest issue is there. But overall, we've got cover, and there's still players that I'd like to see under a different manager that we saw under, like Knockaert. I think we were all disappointed with Knockaert. He started okay, but really never sort of pressed on and did what he'd done I remember him at Brighton tearing us one down at the Amex when we lost 5-0 down there, and he looked a different class. And we never seem to have got the player that we thought we'd got there. So I'm excited to see him under Silva as well. The only other thing I'd say, Matt, before we move on, if we need to move on, is that what you said right at the opening of that, I'd say potentially it's the only criticism I'd have of Silva so far, and I think his man management seems a lot better than Parker's. And what I've liked most about this season, other than putting teams to the sword and scoring a few goals, is actually seeing the players play with a smile on their face, and that's been lovely to see. The only slight criticism I'd have of Silva is I don't understand why we've handled the Christie situation in the way we did, coming out publicly saying, he hasn't got a future at the club, stuff like that. That comment was made after the injury to Tete, and risking having a player that they're not obviously. Cyrus isn't going to be over the moon with that, with his nose out of joint when we hadn't brought in a replacement for Ted. And actually what has ended up transpiring is we haven't been able to bring in a right back, and he's probably our second choice after O'Doy, and we will need him at some point. That it feels like that was a little bit misjudged, and it's probably the only thing I can say that about with Silva so far. That's the only situation I think he might have slightly misjudged.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I said to you earlier when we were talking about this as well, it just feels like it's a Portuguese trait, doesn't it? Because he's not the first Portuguese person or Portuguese manager to come out and criticise his players publicly. Yeah, not criticise, but make a remark like that. So, yeah, let's move it on and talk about the players that have left the club this summer. Marcus Bessinelli and Kevin McDonald, of course, were both released earlier in the summer. Stefan Johansson signed for QPR. And then Maxime Lemarchand and Abu Kamara both left. But the Zambo and Guisa one on deadline day, or the day before deadline day in the end, was a very interesting one because he'd been rumoured to be on his way all summer. And then he signed a contract extension and left for Napoli. Danny, what did you make of that? There's a few kind of schools of thought here, aren't there, as to why we've done that, or why he may have done that?
Yeah, well, I suppose Fulham have got to protect their investment in the player. They don't want to lose him for nothing. So I mean, you've gone to the wrong person there. You should have gone to Tristan about the financial reasons why we did that.
I think, Dan, it's a really simple one with Anguissa. I think I think there's an element of us, we're not going to want to lose him on a free, but actually, there's a very important definition with contract renewals or contract extensions that happen over a player. And when you see it quite often when you sign players and you have options for another year or another 2 years, and that phraseology is quite important, because when it's a contract extension, it allows you to amortize. We just got, we're not going to recap the whole amortization mess, but it allows you to amortize what remains of that player's book value over the period of the contract that it has now become. So effectively, by extending him for another year from a 5-year to a 6-year deal, it spreads out. I think we were looking at about 12 million left as residual value. And instead of that hitting our accounts at 6 million a season over the next 2 seasons, it'll actually drop it to 4 million a season over the next 3 seasons. So it gives us about a 2 million in-year benefit to our P&L, which I think we're probably got, by the looks of the Wilson deal, that we've obviously, pushed that back for a year. In terms of that cost going into our accounts, if you look at the relatively low cost transfers we've done, I think it's all been done with FFP in mind, and definitely the Anguissa extension. So very important there. And you saw how it was phrased. It was phrased as a contract extension rather than a new contract. And that's why they would have done that. I think that would have been the main driver behind it.
One thing I can come to you on, Danny, moving things on. Speaking of new contracts, the main man, Alexander Mitrovic, signing his new deal last week and then celebrating it with a goal at the weekend.
Well, it's funny. When we was on our way back from Huddersfield after the 5-1, I put a tweet out from my account saying that if Mitro stays in this window and scores the goals that get us back to the Premier League for a third time, he will go down as one of our greatest players. Not necessarily because he's the best, but because of his loyalty to the club and what he's achieving. I think we're very lucky to have him. And I think in my lifetime, I would say, I'm not going to compare it to Simon Morgan because what Simon Morgan did for Fulham was a one-off and in completely different circumstances. But I would say that Mitrovic and Simon Morgan are the only players I would say whose loyalty to the club has really been proven, for staying through with us through difficult times when they were clearly too good for the level we were at. So I love him. How can you not? His passion, his enthusiasm, when he's on it, he's probably the most popular player I can remember. I mean, who else could take over Our Day at Wembley with their own song and have all his teammates singing it, 38,000 fans? He's one of a kind. And although we've had better strikers, I would argue he's probably the most lovable. So I'm absolutely chuffed. And if he stays fit and he's on fire, then it's very hard to see who's going to stop us. I know that sounds arrogant, but when you're good, you got to admit you're good. And at the moment, we are absolutely flying.
I bumped into I went up to Scotland on holiday last week, and I bumped into a West Brom fan on his way back from a guy. I can't remember who they were playing, and he come up to me in the service station and just said to me, "Us and you are walking this league this year." And I kind of, friendly fan nodded at him and agreed, but secretly in my head thought, "You ain't going to be anywhere near us, mate." And I'm not. I am really not one of those fans that is overconfident with our chances. Usually, I'm always a little bit. Oh, this could go wrong. This could go. I can't say. I think we've been so good, and I kind of I turned round. Matt was stood kind of vertically behind me at Huddersfield, and I kind of turned at him when the fourth one got, because it was almost reminiscent of that game. I don't know if either of you two were at it, but the Watford game away under Tigana when we were 2-0 up and cruising. Helgeson's bundled in a goal, and the whole stadium's gone up. Watford have gone up expecting this grandstand finish, and they didn't get the ball, and we made it 3-1. And it was exactly the same at Huddersfield. It was 3-1. Wilson had just been sent off. Everyone's expecting, we made a change, brought on another attacking player, and Carvalho's gone down the other end and scored. And at that point, I just turned around to Matt and just sort of shrugged my shoulders as if to say, yeah, we're just too good. And the thing is, a lot of people that day said, you won't play a worse side than Huddersfield. They haven't lost another game that's the only game they've lost this season. Yeah. So they're not that bad.
They turned Reading over 4-0 at the weekend, didn't they? They're flying at the moment. Well, what was that quote you sent me from Mitro earlier?
Yeah, it was in. So it was in. There's a Serbian outlet that covers a lot of the players, and there was a quote in there just saying, about why Mitrovic would have stayed at Fulham when obviously there was some interest from bigger leagues. And I think there's a lot of kind of pressure on that way of thinking because I don't know if you've heard of him, this guy Dusan Vlahovic has really exploded in Italy and scored loads of goals for Fiorentina. You've obviously got Jovic at Real Madrid. And it feels like for the first time in quite a long time, there's genuine competition for the place in the national team for Mitrovic. And there was a quote in Mozart Sport, this media outlet where he said an old Serbian phrase that translates into English: it's better to be first in a town than last in a city. And I think that kind of sums his attitude up. He wants to be playing. He doesn't want to be sat around on the bench at a bigger club not playing. His main driver is playing every week, and I think that was why it really, really got to him under Parker. But I thought, I've read it and I thought, what a great quote. It's very clear that the guy loves playing for Fulham and he feels very at home there. So I think you have to feed that into what Danny's saying as well, in terms of him being, such a fan, such a player that's got a bond with the fan base. And I think that's why I was a little bit disappointed where a proportion of that kind of turned a bit last year, because I thought that was a little bit unfair, given the circumstances. But that's a whole Pandora's box that I won't get into now.
Sure. All right, mate. Well, you've already said that you think that this summer's transfer window has been our best under the Khans. How would you rate it, Danny?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I think the most encouraging thing for me is that it seems like a lot of lessons have been learnt from previous mistakes. Keena was the only loan we brought in. Effectively, it depended on how you determine that Wilson deal. And it just seemed a more long-term vision, with the manager having a much bigger say, or also it seems. I feel like for the first time, the squad isn't lopsided. We have a very well-balanced squad with covering every position, bar maybe a backup for Mitrovic, but I think that was always going to be the hardest position to fill, because whoever came in was always going to be the backup for Mitrovic. So it's very difficult to get in a good striker that's going to want to sit on the bench. So I feel overall, we're arguing about, getting. They were worried about getting in a right back. I mean, how greedy can you be? We've got the biggest squad, options in every position. If we do get a couple of injuries along the way, that's what happens. I feel like we are very well equipped to cope with anyone getting injured except for Mitrovic. So very, very happy. And now we just need that little bit of luck along the way. Tigana had that bit of luck. People like Sahar stayed, apart from Coleman, we did pretty well with injuries that season. And if we can have that bit of luck this season, then who knows? We could absolutely storm it, couldn't we?
I think we may well just do that. All right, boys. Well, we're going to come on and talk about the financial side a little bit more after this.
Fulham.
Well, there's been quite a bit made of the fact that the value of our squad is significantly more than other teams in the Championship. And let's name and shame the second tier podcast for winding people up on social media about this. And personally, I've not got a problem with the second tier at all. They're a nice couple of lads. And, I do a few bits for them from time to time, Fulham bits. But the fact that they're saying that it puts the division at an unfair disadvantage or an unfair advantage in our favour, I suppose. Is this any different to any other season? Surely no. It's not. This happens every year, right?
Yeah, and actually, the fundamental way that parachute payments are done ensures that it doesn't change. So since 2016-17, it was changed from a four year drop of payments to 3 year. And actually how they've done it now is that it's not a set amount of money. It's a percentage of what the central award or the overall sort of share of TV revenue, if you will, that gets allocated to the Premier League, gets allocated to the relegated clubs. And the way it works is it's 55% of the central award. So if a Premier League gets 100 million, then Fulham, West Brom would get 55 million. 55% of the central award in year one, 45% in year two, and 20% in year three. And that's how it's done. So actually, even if that prize money fluctuates and goes up, which sometimes it does if new broadcasting deals come in and things like that, the share remains the same. So yeah, absolutely. There's no difference. It's not just us either. So that we're not. They don't go, what we're going to give the parachute payments to one relegated club. So the fact that they're picking on us, I mean, like you, I'm not that bothered by it. But, the fact that they're picking us out particularly, well, Sheffield United and West Brom have got that as well. If they're not using it, that's down to them. Bournemouth had it last year, and they're still getting their 45% this year. So they're not really much different. The only kind of alteration to that, and that's kind of affected us this time around, and when we got promoted, is that those payments obviously stop once you get promoted back to the Premier League if you do it within that time frame. So last time we would have only received year one, and if we go up this year again, we'll only achieve year one. Now, it's also, criticism of that is also really short-sighted, because ultimately it is done to safeguard clubs financially. It's not done to give them an unfair advantage. But what the football regulators kind of understand is that you can't just cancel a load of contracts. You can try and move players on. You can try and sign them. You can try and put in relegation, wage drop clauses. But ultimately, if you sign a player who's on a particular contract, it has to be upheld unless one of those things happen. And what the parachute payments do is soften the impact of that and ensure that clubs basically aren't going into administration if they get relegated, which if they didn't have parachute payments, probably you'd see happen a lot more than does. And it's not, you can see from our business, it's not like we've hoarded up a load of signings and spent tens of millions on players. Our net input into, transfers this season, when you consider how the Wilson thing's been done and the cost of Muniz and Chalobah amortised, is probably no more than 4 or 5 million at absolute most. So it's not like we're going out there spending the 30 million because we're just rinsing parachute money. That's not how it works.
Isn't the problem here less to do with clubs coming down and needing parachute payments, but the amount that you have to spend to try and be competitive when you go up in the first place, and then the kind of remnants of what's left when you come back down after that? You could do in Norwich, but Norwich never compete in the Premier League. They're a classic yo-yo club. They'll go down, they'll get promoted again, spend next to nothing, and go down again, and they're happy just to move up and down. Whereas with us, at least we have a go, and if you have a go, then, like you say, with the contract situation, you still have to honour those contracts when you come back down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it, if you look at, we mentioned it on the last podcast, the state Villa were in after they came down. I mean, I don't remember them getting anywhere near the grief we're getting.
Yeah.
And they were much worse financially than us, and they were going out and bringing in players like John Terry, and I'm sure he weren't playing for a packet of cheese and onion. So do you know what I mean? It's not. I think we're attracting a bit of unfair criticism because we're not a trendy club in terms of people like to think of the big clubs as they define them in the Championship, and we're not one of those. They'd love to see a Forest or someone like that be at the top end. So yeah, sorry, Dan, I can see you virtually waving, so I'll let you jump in.
Oh no, it's not a big deal. No, it's just I was going to say, obviously with Norwich and Watford going straight back up last season pretty comfortably, if the same happens this season with us and West Brom, the Championship's in danger of losing that brand it has of being the most competitive league in the world. It's becoming, the gap between the Premier League and the Championship is getting bigger and bigger, and I could see that becoming a pattern over the next few years, that 2 of the 3 that go down end up going straight back up, just through default of just having a stronger squad and financially being better off. And I don't think COVID is going to help that.
I'm not. I know it's happened a couple of years, but I'm not convinced that a couple of years is a pattern. I think you'd have to see it happen over a couple more seasons because there are. I think we've actually managed the finances quite well, and I think we've really, every single blooming loophole you could go to this summer we have done because we've had to, but we've managed that situation quite well. But there are clubs that don't. Sheffield United, I think they've got, obviously rate Jukanovic, and they've got a good manager in place, but I don't think they're going to feature this year. I think, Villa took 4 years to come back. We took 4 years first time around. I think there's plenty of examples actually where clubs haven't bounced straight back. Bournemouth, they're down this year, and I can't see them go back up this year. There's plenty of examples of clubs that haven't bounced back. So I'm not sure if we're picking up on it just because it's happened this season and kind of thinking, oh, this is a for me, 1 or 2 seasons isn't a trend. So I'd need to see it happen over more before I'd completely agree with you, Dan. But I do, I think there's a fundamental, and I think you see it with the gaps in the Premier League where you've got, clear divides there now between the haves and the haves not. It's not even just divisional now where the money's split in. It's actually within division, and what you could end up with is what I think you're alluding to, which is the same situation in the Championship where effectively you have 8 to 10 teams, 3 of which would be the ones that have come down, and then another 6 or 7 that are perpetually always in that top 10. And that's no one wants that. I mean, even one of the clubs that's in that top 10 wouldn't want that, I don't think.
I mean, it's early days, so it's too hard to say at the moment. But based on what we've seen so far, I would just say that over the last couple of seasons, the division just seems to be significantly weaker than it usually is, rather than necessarily we are just really, really strong. I think it's a combination of both. It doesn't seem as competitive as it normally is. I mean, would you just say that is down to COVID and it's a temporary dip?
I'm not sure if it's down to COVID. But you'll get seasons like I think you will get seasons where the division is either very strong or under par for the level of the clubs in it. I think the first season we made the playoffs, I didn't think it was a bar. I didn't think Brighton were outstanding. I thought we could have beaten them both games when we weren't even in particularly good form. I think, we did beat Newcastle both games, and they kind of, those two ran away with it. So I didn't think, that was a particularly strong league. And I think, so we have seen it when it's been like that before. We just haven't taken advantage of it. I think this is the season when we can do it. But I don't know that COVID would have had an impact really, because actually the financial kind of allowances that are being built in for COVID, I think are I think they're a bit higher than the actual impact's been. They seem to be slightly more than, the loss through gate receipts and stuff. So I don't know that it's hit as hard as we would have expected.
All right, well, we've got a couple of minutes left. Tristan, I just wanted to ask you one more thing about parachute payments, just to kind of round this off. What would happen to a club financially if they went down and didn't receive parachute payments?
Well, look, I think we used the word fire sale before, and I think you're absolutely there, and I think you're forcing a club's hand to sell or release players for way below what they would normally be holding out for. And I think they would still probably fail FFP for the most part. If you look at it in context, our parachute payments this season, going by what we generally get through, your sponsorships and gate receipts and stuff like that. If you factor in the parachute payments as a proportion, it'd be something like 70% of our revenue is parachute payments. Now, we talked about the massive loss we made, last time out, and I think you add to that the deduction of 70% of the revenue, 70% of the turnover, and obviously you're talking about best part of probably 100 million loss instead of a 40 million loss. So I think it's that's the scale of the issue if those were to get removed.
Just looking at the Championship table, just to look at the clubs that have been in the Premier League semi-recently. You got QPR, you got Huddersfield, Stoke, Bournemouth, Birmingham. I don't know where last time Blackburn were there. Middlesbrough, Derby were there a few years ago. Hull, Swansea, Reading, Sheffield United. All these clubs will have received parachute payments. So the message for them has just got to be better, hasn't it? And stop whinging.
Yeah, and look, Matt, I don't think we were better. I think we handled it terribly at first. I think,
Agreed.
when we first got relegated, we made probably one of the biggest balls ups of it that we possibly could in the way that we handled it. I mean, the whole thing around the Ruiz transfer in the January that led to us actually failing FFP and getting the embargo and stuff. I mean, it was just pure incompetence, right? And I think it shows how much actually, for all the criticisms we have of the Khans and all the rest of it, that there has been it might have been a slower learning curve than everyone wanted, but there has been a learning curve. Yeah. And we've actually, as I've said, we've played the rules and the loopholes as well as we could have done this summer. It's been very, very well done. And yeah, absolutely, do it better. I think, you rattle through that list and you've probably got 7 or 8 clubs in the league that not only have been in the Premier League, but as of this season, still going to be receiving parachute payments. So it's not, there's definitely the financial opportunities there for the clubs to be able to do that, but you've got to manage it right.
Yeah, I think a lot of the criticism of us, it still stems from that 100 million we spent. I think that's still hanging over us. I don't know when people are going to ever let that go. I just wondered, Tristan, when will that stop having an impact on our finances for FFP and that? When can we finally say we can draw a line under it? I know we've still got Seri and Mawson and Gisa still on the books, but when can we say, right, now we can draw a line under it, stop talking about it, it's gone?
Well, I think after this season, to be honest, mate, I think look, you've got for that, the start of that season is day one of season one, and we're now kind of a month or so into season 4, and most of the contracts were 4-year, some were 5, some have had extensions class, so there will be a small residual value going into next season and possibly even a little bit the following season in Anguissa's case, but you're talking a couple of million, not tens of millions. And I think so the bulk of it will wash through this year. In terms of the amortization, you might not notice it wash through that much, because then the following season we've then gone and signed, Reed, Carvalho, Knockhart, all for pretty sizable fees. So there's some knock on from that as well. But it will, I mean, as we mentioned on the last podcast, it's kind of between 40 and 45 million, has been for the last couple of seasons, will be this season. I'd expect that to half, if not more. So realistically, I think, this is the last season with the big hanger. And going back to the first point you've made there's a lot of kind of criticism of us that stems from that. We do it as well. I mean, I'm still critical of us because of that, and probably everyone on this call and most people listening to it. It was carnage. Not using a
nice pun.
No, I know.
I like it.
It was a great pun that I didn't even think of. Yeah,
I can't believe we've never used that before.
it was carnage, as we say, and really scattergun and chalk and cheese to what we've just seen, which has been methodical, getting the right players that the manager wants that fit in with the squad. Happy days, right?
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show. Tristan, brilliant as always. Thanks for coming back on, mate. And Danny, thanks as always for your time as well. Just a reminder that you can subscribe to the Fulham Focus podcast if you don't already do so on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you may care to get your podcast from. Please do also follow us on social media. On Twitter, we are at Fulham_Focus, and on Instagram at Fulham Focus. Also, check out our website at fulhamfocus.com, where you'll find plenty of great content in addition to the podcast. We'll be back on Thursday next week with your Blackpool preview, and that game has been earmarked for a cracking little away day bonanza by a few of us for quite some time now, so plenty to be looking forward to. Thanks for listening, folks. Speak to you next week. Cheers.
Fulham.